In today's episode, we've got some incredible stories lined up, and I know you all are going to love them. I'm super excited to dive in and share these with you. As always, if you enjoy the video, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more amazing content. Now, without further ado, let's jump right into it.
I was sitting at my desk, scrolling through the endless list of tasks for the week when a message popped up from an old friend, Lisa. She had invited me to a party on Friday. It was at a rooftop bar downtown, stylish, upscale, the kind of place we hadn't been to in months. Normally, I would have passed without a second thought, but then I remembered who was hosting. Jake. The memory of our last encounter flashed through my mind. Charming, with a perfect smile, he was the kind of guy who always got attention. We'd crossed paths a few times, mostly at work events, and while I never acted on it, there was a harmless flirtation there. Nothing serious. But this time, he had personally invited me. It wasn't just a mass message, he'd taken the time to ask if I was going. I hesitated, staring at my phone. A small part of me knew my husband wouldn't be thrilled about me going to some fancy party, especially not with Jake involved. It wasn't that he didn't trust me. It's just, he didn't like Jake. I'd mentioned him once or twice, and I could sense the irritation in his voice. Maybe it was his good looks or the fact that he always seemed to have the perfect thing to say. But I told myself it was just a party. No harm in catching up with friends and enjoying a night out, right? When Lisa called me that afternoon, her excitement was contagious. Come on, it'll be fun. You've been cooped up for too long. Plus, Jake asked about you, so you kinda have to go. That last part made my heart skip a beat. I told her I'd think about it, but the decision was already forming in my mind. The truth is, I wanted to go. I wanted to feel that sense of freedom, the rush of putting on a dress and stepping into a place where no one saw me as just a wife, but as myself. As the hours passed, I found myself thinking more about it. About the way Jake smiled when we last met, how he lingered just a second longer during that handshake. It wasn't inappropriate, just flattering. Something that, if I was honest, I missed. Later that evening, I casually brought up the party. My husband was sitting on the couch, half watching TV while scrolling through his phone. I started with the usual small talk, working my way to the topic. So, Lisa messaged me today, I said. There's a party Friday night. It's at that new rooftop bar downtown. A few of us are thinking of going. He barely looked up. Oh, yeah? Sounds nice. I could feel the tension building already, but I kept going. Yeah, Jake's hosting. You remember him, right? He sent me a personal invite. That got his attention. He put his phone down and looked at me, his brow furrowing just slightly. Jake? That guy from your work events. Yeah, him. But it's not like that. He invited a bunch of people and Lisa's going too. It's just a party. I could see his jaw tighten and I knew what was coming. I don't think you should go. That was it. Just a flat, no-nonsense statement. I knew he wouldn't be thrilled, but I didn't expect him to outright say no. Why not? I asked, keeping my tone even, though I could feel the irritation creeping in. It's just a party. I haven't been out with my friends in months. He sighed, clearly not wanting to get into it. It's not about the party. It's him. You know how I feel about Jake. And there it was. Jake. I had known this would be the sticking point. He's just a friend, nothing more. You know that. But he wasn't convinced. Look, it's not that I don't trust you. I just don't like the idea of you going to some party hosted by a guy who clearly has a thing for you. That set me off. A thing for me? Really? This is about your insecurity, not Jake. The words slipped out before I could stop them, sharper than I intended. He stood up, shaking his head. I'm not insecure. I'm just asking you to think about how it looks, how it feels. I don't want you to go. I crossed my arms, feeling the heat rise in my chest. I don't see the problem. It's a few drinks with friends. I'm not doing anything wrong. We stood there, facing off, neither willing to back down. The conversation went in circles. I'd made up my mind, and no matter how much he protested, I wasn't going to change it. Eventually, he just stopped talking, the silence heavy and uncomfortable. He turned and walked out of the room, leaving me standing there, frustrated and determined. I was going to that party, whether he liked it or not. I'm leaving, and that's final. I snapped, standing at the foot of the stairs, my coat in one hand and my purse in the other. I could hear my husband's footsteps behind me as he followed me to the door, his frustration simmering just beneath the surface. "You're really going to do this?" His voice was low, but I could hear the edge in it. "You're going to ignore everything I said? You know how I feel about this party, about him." I spun around, glaring at him. "This isn't about Jake. It's about me wanting to have a night out for once without you breathing down my neck." "It's not just a night out, and you know it," he shot back. "He invited you for a reason. You think he's just being friendly? He's flirting with you, and you're letting him." I rolled my eyes, pulling my coat on. "I'm not letting anything happen. Jake's a nice guy, that's all. You're paranoid. I just want to have some fun. Is that so hard to understand?" He ran a hand through his hair, clearly trying to keep his composure. "You want to have fun? Fine. But with him? After I've told you how uncomfortable it makes me, you're going to throw that in my face and still go." I clenched my fists, my frustration boiling over. "You don't get to decide who I hang out with. I'm not asking for your permission. I told you I was going, and that's what I'm doing. You don't have to like it, but you're not going to stop me." His eyes hardened. "This is what our marriage has come to? You ignoring me completely? You don't care how I feel anymore, do you?" I grabbed the doorknob, my hand shaking. "I care about me for once. You're always trying to control everything, and I'm tired of it." He stepped closer, his voice low and cold. "You go ahead then, but don't expect me to be here when you get back." I froze for a second, feeling the weight of his words hit me. But instead of backing down, I let the anger take over. Fine, maybe I'll enjoy the peace and quiet for once. Without waiting for a response, I yanked the door open and slammed it behind me with enough force to make the house shake. My heart pounded in my chest as I stormed to the car, fuming. The drive to the party was a blur of angry thoughts. By the time I pulled up to the venue, my hands were still shaking, though now from a mixture of excitement and nerves. I wasn't going to let him ruin my night. I deserved this, just one evening to forget about everything. As I stepped out of the car and walked up to the entrance, the pulsing music from inside made the tension in my shoulders ease a little. I could already hear laughter and see people through the windows, drinks in hand, mingling and smiling. This was what I needed, a distraction. I pushed open the door, stepping into the warm, lively atmosphere. Immediately, I was greeted by my friends, a chorus of voices calling my name. "Hey, you made it." Sarah was the first to spot me, waving me over with a wide smile. "We were wondering if you'd show." I forced a smile, trying to shake off the argument that still clung to me like a shadow. "Of course I did. Wouldn't miss it." "Drinks are over there. Help yourself," Sarah said, pointing toward a long table loaded with everything from champagne to cocktails. "We've only just started, so you're right on time." I made my way toward the bar, but before I could grab a drink, I heard that familiar voice. "Well, look who finally decided to join the party." Jake appeared beside me, flashing his signature charming grin. He leaned in a little closer, his eyes glinting with mischief. "I was starting to think you were going to ditch us." I shrugged, trying to play it cool. "Had a bit of a delay, but I'm here now." His gaze lingered on me for a moment, and I couldn't help but notice the way his smile widened. "Good. Wouldn't be the same without you." I smiled back, feeling a strange mix of guilt and defiance swirl inside me. There was something about Jake, something that made me feel lighter, more carefree. And right now, that was exactly what I needed. "Come on, let's get you a drink," he said, motioning toward the bar. "The night's just getting started." As we walked over together, I could feel the tension from the argument with my husband fading. Here, surrounded by laughter and music, it was easy to forget the mess waiting for me at home. For now, I was going to enjoy this night, no matter what. The drive back from the party was quiet, the streets nearly empty, illuminated only by the soft glow of the streetlights. I replayed the evening in my head. The laughter, the music, the compliments. Jake had been as charming as ever, making sure I had a drink in my hand and never once letting the conversation lag. He had a way of making me feel noticed, important. I had stayed later than I intended. My phone buzzed a few times with texts from my husband, but I didn't check them right away. I was too caught up in the moment, just enjoying myself. Now, pulling into our driveway, my stomach tightened with unease. I hadn't heard from him in hours. The house was dark, except for the faint glow of the living room light leaking through the blinds. I parked the car and stepped out, bracing myself for the conversation that awaited inside. But when I reached the door and turned the handle, it didn't budge. Locked. I frowned, trying again, harder this time, but it wouldn't give. I knocked softly, then again, louder. No answer. I checked my phone. 2 missed calls, 4 texts. My heart sank as I read through them. Where are you? You're really going to that party? We need to talk. I've had enough of this. Stay out. I stood there, phone in hand, staring at that last message. Stay out? What was that supposed to mean? The cold night air started to settle in as I tried knocking again, this time pounding harder. Still nothing. My frustration bubbled over, and I called him, but it went straight to voicemail. I couldn't believe it. He'd actually locked me out of our home. Was he serious? Anger flared up inside me. Who does that? Over a party? I pulled my coat tighter around me and stepped back, scanning the dark windows of the house. He was in there, I knew it. Probably sitting on the couch, waiting for me to knock all night, thinking he was proving some kind of point. And Jake. I thought of him for a moment, of how easy it had been to forget everything for just a few hours. No tension, no arguments, just fun. How had it come to this? I took a deep breath and knocked again, harder this time. Come on, open the door. I shouted, my voice echoing through the quiet street. We need to talk. But there was still no response. The silence was deafening. Standing there in the cold, I couldn't believe this was happening. He had actually locked me out, refused to answer my calls, and ignored me like I didn't exist. I felt my frustration turn into full-blown anger as I knocked on the door again, shouting louder. Open the door. This is ridiculous. I yelled, my voice shaking. After a few agonizing moments, I heard the lock click and the door creaked open. My husband stood there, his face expressionless, eyes cold. The man I'd known for years, who used to wait up for me with concern or love in his eyes, now just stared at me like I was a stranger. You're finally back, he said, his voice flat. I pushed past him, stepping into the warmth of the house, but the air between us was icy. What the hell was that? Locking me out? Are you serious? He shut the door behind me and crossed his arms. You ignored everything I said. You went to the party, didn't even bother to check your phone, and stayed out all night with him. This isn't about Jake, I snapped. It's about you trying to control what I do. It's just a party with friends. I didn't do anything wrong. You're overreacting. He shook his head, his jaw tight. Overreacting? You think this is about control? I asked you not to go because of how it makes me feel, because of how he looks at you, and you just brushed it off like it didn't matter. I crossed my arms, defensive. You're being paranoid. Jake is just a nice guy. He invited me, and I went, big deal. I had fun for once. God forbid I enjoy myself without you breathing down my neck. He took a step closer, his voice low and firm. It's not about you having fun, and you know it. It's about respect. I told you how I felt, and you went anyway. You didn't even consider how it might affect me. I scoffed. Respect? Don't talk to me about respect when you locked me out of our own home. That's childish and petty. He didn't back down, his eyes narrowing. Childish? You ignored me the whole night. You didn't care how I felt, didn't care what I said. I locked the door because I'm tired of this back and forth, tired of you not listening. This isn't about Jake or the party anymore. It's about us and the fact that you don't think about anyone but yourself. That's not true, I said quickly, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew they were hollow. I had ignored his feelings. I'd brushed him off, convinced myself that I was in the right, that my fun was more important than the tension growing between us. And you have the nerve to blame me for this? I continued, trying to regain control of the conversation. You locked me out. That's extreme. Over a stupid party? You're acting like I committed some huge betrayal. His eyes darkened, the hurt visible now beneath his frustration. The party wasn't the betrayal. It was the fact that you didn't care enough to even consider how I felt. You put Jake, some guy who flirts with you, above me, your husband. I opened my mouth to argue, but no words came. I hadn't thought of it that way. To me, it was just a night out, a break from the routine, but to him, it was something much deeper, something I had ignored. The room went silent after his last words. I stood there, feeling the weight of what he had just said settle over me. It wasn't just about the party. It was about us, everything we had been avoiding for months, maybe longer. For the first time that night, I felt a pang of guilt. I opened my mouth to respond, but what could I say? I had ignored him, dismissed his feelings, and now here we were, standing on opposite sides of the room, like strangers who no longer knew how to talk to each other. I didn't think it would matter this much, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. I didn't mean to make you feel like you weren't important. He let out a tired sigh, rubbing his temples as if this whole situation was exhausting him. It's not about one night. It's the pattern, the way you've been shutting me out. This party was just the tipping point. I swallowed hard, knowing he was right. I had been distant, and the party, Jake, especially, was just the easiest thing to point to. But underneath it all, something had been unraveling between us for a long time, and neither of us had stopped to fix it. So what now? I asked quietly, my voice shaky. Are we just done? He stared at me for a moment, and for the first time that night, I saw the pain in his eyes clearly. The anger had faded, replaced by a sadness that was somehow worse. I don't know, he admitted, his voice soft. I need time to think. To figure out if this is something we can fix, or if we've just grown too far apart. The lump in my throat grew, and I blinked back the tears threatening to spill. I wanted to reach out to him, to tell him we could work through this, but the truth was, I wasn't sure either. Maybe I hadn't just ignored his feelings, maybe I had ignored my own. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. He looked at me one last time before turning away and walking upstairs, leaving me standing alone in the dimly lit living room. The sound of his footsteps on the stairs echoed in the silence, and as I stood there, the weight of everything hit me all at once. This wasn't how things were supposed to end. Not like this. I sank onto the couch, staring at the spot where he had been moments before, the reality of the situation settling over me like a cold, heavy blanket. We had both made mistakes, but now it felt like we had crossed a line that neither of us knew how to come back from. The next few days were a blur of awkward silences and half-hearted conversations. He stayed distant, avoiding me whenever possible, while I tried to find the words to make things right. But every time I opened my mouth, nothing came out. I didn't know how to fix this, didn't know if I could. A week later, I came home from work to find a note on the kitchen counter. It wasn't long, just a few lines, but it was enough to make my stomach drop. I need some space. I'm going to stay with my brother for a while. I think we both need time to figure out what we really want. I read it twice, the words blurring as tears filled my eyes. He was leaving. Not permanently, but still, it felt like the beginning of the end. I sank into the nearest chair, clutching the note in my hands. This wasn't how I thought things would go. I hadn't meant for any of this to happen, but now it felt like I had pushed him away without even realizing it. As the days passed, the house felt emptier without him. I kept telling myself that it was just a break, that we would talk things through eventually. But deep down, I knew something had changed between us, something that might never go back to the way it was. Maybe it was Jake. Maybe it was the party. But more than that, it was the slow unraveling of everything we had once been. And now, all I could do was wait, hoping that we hadn't let it all slip away for good. But as the silence stretched on, the hope I clung to began to feel thinner by the day.